What if I told you that some of the world's most beautiful cars were actually rolling death machines? From vehicles that burst into flames on impact to cars that killed their own test drivers, these 15 automotive nightmares prove that sometimes engineering brilliance can become your worst enemy. And number one on this list? It's a machine so dangerous that even professional drivers refuse to push it to its limits. Let's dive into automotive history's darkest chapter. And trust me, you won't believe what's coming at number 1. Number 15. The 1987 to 1993 Yugo GV. Picture this. You're driving down the highway when suddenly a gust of wind picks up your entire car and throws it off a bridge. Sounds impossible? Tell that to Leslie Ann Pluhar, whose Yugo was literally blown off the Mackinac Bridge in Michigan by a 50-mile-per-hour wind gust. This wasn't just poor engineering. This was automotive negligence wrapped in sheet metal that weighed less than most motorcycles. Built in communist Yugoslavia with outdated 1960s Fiat technology, the Yugo was a disaster waiting to happen. The doors would fly open during crashes, the steering wheel would come off in your hands, and the body panels were so thin they'd crumple from minor impacts. Quality control was non-existent. Cars would arrive at dealerships with missing bolts, disconnected wires, and engines that barely ran. But here's the truly terrifying part. The Yugo's lightweight construction meant it would disintegrate on impact, offering virtually no protection to occupants. Emergency responders dreaded Yugo accidents because they knew survival chances were minimal. Insurance companies eventually started refusing coverage, recognizing that the Yugo was simply too dangerous to insure. At $4,000, it wasn't just cheap transportation, it was a coffin on wheels. Number 14. The 2003 to 2010 Hummer H2. Imagine you're a soccer mom driving your kids to school when an 8,600-pound monster comes barreling through a red light. The impact doesn't just hurt, it obliterates. The H2 wasn't just oversized, it was a civilian weapon that made every road more dangerous for everyone except its own occupants. This military wannabe had a fatal accident rate that made headlines for all the wrong reasons. The real danger was physics. In crashes with normal cars, the H2's massive weight would literally crush smaller vehicles, turning minor accidents into fatalities for other drivers. Picture a tank versus a tin can. That's what every collision looked like. The high center of gravity made rollovers common, and when a 4-ton vehicle rolls, everyone nearby suffers. The vehicle's military-inspired design meant it had sharp edges and aggressive styling that turned pedestrian impacts into certain death sentences. What made it truly evil was how it encouraged reckless behavior. Drivers felt invincible in their fortress, driving more aggressively, knowing they'd likely survive any crash. The problem was, everyone else wouldn't. Emergency responders called H2 accidents David versus Goliath scenarios, except David always lost. The vehicle was eventually discontinued when insurance costs became unbearable and public outrage reached fever pitch. Number 13. The 1958 to 1960 Ford Edsel. What happens when you put the gear selector in the most dangerous place possible? You get the Edsel, a car that turned simple driving into a deadly gamble. The push-button transmission controls were mounted in the steering wheel center, creating confusion that led to countless accidents. Drivers would accidentally shift into reverse while driving at highway speeds, or find themselves unable to shift at all during emergency situations. But the transmission was just the beginning of this nightmare. The Edsel's unique styling created deadly blind spots everywhere you looked. The massive rear fins blocked rear visibility. The wraparound windshield created optical distortions that made objects appear closer or farther than they actually were. And the low roofline made it impossible to see over other vehicles. Imagine trying to merge onto a highway when you literally can't see what's coming. Ford's rush to market meant crucial safety testing was skipped entirely. The steering was so heavy that drivers couldn't make emergency maneuvers. The brakes would fade after minimal use, and the suspension would collapse under normal driving loads. The electrical system was notoriously unreliable, with headlights failing at night and turn signals that worked only when they felt like it. The Edsel proved that good looks couldn't compensate for fundamental engineering failures that put lives at risk every single day. Number 12. The 1984 to 1988 Pontiac Fiero. Imagine you're stuck in traffic when you smell something burning. You check your rearview mirror and see flames consuming the back of your car while you're still sitting in it. This wasn't a crash-related fire. This was spontaneous automotive arson that could happen at any moment. The Pontiac Fiero promised affordable mid-engine excitement, but delivered something far more sinister, a car that would literally set itself on fire. The Fiero's 2.5-liter Iron Duke engine was positioned directly behind the driver, surrounded by plastic body panels and inadequate cooling. Under normal driving conditions, the engine would overheat, and the connecting rods would break through the engine block like bullets. Hot oil would spray onto the plastic panels, and within seconds, the entire rear of the car would be engulfed in flames. Picture being trapped in a cockpit while fire consumes everything behind you. That was the Fiero experience. General Motors received thousands of reports of Fieros catching fire, often while stopped at traffic lights or parked in driveways. Fire departments developed specific protocols for Fiero fires because they happened so frequently. The car's plastic construction meant that once ignition occurred, the entire vehicle would be consumed within minutes, often taking surrounding property with it. By 1988, GM had fixed most of the problems, but the damage was done. The Fiero's reputation as a self-destructing sports car was sealed in flames. Number 11. The 1960 to 1969 Chevrolet Corvair. Ralph Nader didn't just write a book about the Corvair, he wrote its obituary. Unsafe at any speed exposed lethal flaws that GM knew about but ignored, turning families into unwitting crash test dummies. The death rate statistics were horrifying enough that it changed automotive safety regulations forever, but not before claiming countless lives. Here's what made the Corvair a serial killer. The rear engine design created handling characteristics that violated every principle of safe vehicle dynamics. The car would understeer gently into corners, lulling drivers into false confidence, then suddenly snap into violent oversteer with no warning. Imagine driving down your local highway when your car suddenly decides to flip over for no apparent reason. The weight transfer was so extreme that the car would literally somersault through the air. What made it truly evil was how it disguised its lethal nature. At low speeds, the Corvair felt stable and predictable. Families bought them thinking they were getting a stylish, economical car instead of a death trap that would wait until highway speeds to reveal its true nature. The swing axle rear suspension was the executioner. Under cornering loads, the wheels would tuck under the car, causing instant loss of control. GM knew about the problems, but continued production for 9 years, choosing profits over human lives while families paid the ultimate price. Remember to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell because we're just getting to the really dangerous stuff, and what's coming next will absolutely shock you. Number 10. The 1988 to 1991 BMW M3E30. You see it in your rearview mirror. Just another compact BMW sedan, probably driven by someone's accountant. Then it passes you like you're standing still, and 2 corners later, it's wrapped around a tree with emergency crews shaking their heads. The original M3 looked harmless, but was actually one of the most dangerous homologation specials ever unleashed on unsuspecting drivers. The naturally aspirated 2.3-liter 4-cylinder produced 195 horsepower in a car weighing just 2,866 pounds, but power wasn't the killer. It was the Jekyll and Hyde personality. At normal speeds, the M3 felt predictable and safe, which made its violent transition to uncontrollable even more shocking. Picture this: you're cruising through a mountain pass, feeling completely in control, when suddenly the rear end snaps around faster than you can blink. The M3's racing heritage meant it demanded racing-level precision from every driver, and the slightest mistake would be punished instantly and severely. Professional drivers called it beautiful but unforgiving, while emergency rooms across Europe saw a steady stream of M3 owners who'd discovered that racing pedigree and overconfidence make a deadly combination. BMW had essentially created a street-legal race car that looked like family transportation, leading inexperienced drivers into situations they couldn't possibly handle. The car didn't just bite, It devoured anyone who showed it anything less than absolute respect. Number 9. The 1987 Buick Grand National GNX. Your grandmother's Buick just destroyed a Ferrari at the traffic light, then disappeared into the night like some kind of automotive ghost. The Grand National GNX was terrorism disguised as a family sedan, an unassuming black Buick that could humiliate supercars while looking like it belonged in a church parking lot. But this deceptive appearance was its greatest weapon and its victim's biggest mistake. The turbocharged 3.8-liter V6 officially made 276 horsepower, but everyone knew it was closer to 350. The real danger was in the delivery. Turbo lag meant the car felt docile until the boost hit. Then it would explode forward with such violence that it would instantly overwhelm the rear tires. Picture a soccer mom test driving what she thinks is a conservative family car, then experiencing the turbo surge when lag ended and fury began. The car would go sideways so fast that even experienced drivers couldn't catch it. The front heavy weight distribution made recovery nearly impossible once the rear end stepped out, and the GNX would fishtail down the road like an angry snake, often ending up backwards or wrapped around obstacles. Insurance companies learned to fear the Grand National name, charging premiums that reflected its true nature. Buick had created the ultimate sleeper, but sleeping giants have a way of waking up violently. This wasn't your grandmother's Buick. It was a 300-horsepower missile that happened to look like one. Number 8. The 1978 to 1986 Audi 5000, over 650 accidents from 1978 to 1986. But these weren't normal crashes. These were horror movie scenarios where cars turned against their own drivers. Imagine starting your car in your driveway, putting it in gear, then watching in terror as it accelerates on its own, smashing through your garage door while you desperately pump brakes that seem to do nothing. The Audi 5000's sudden unintended acceleration wasn't just mechanical failure. It was automotive possession. The throttle system had a fatal flaw that would cause sudden, uncontrolled acceleration, with absolutely no warning. 1 second you're backing out of your parking space, the next you're a passenger in a runaway missile. What made it terrifying was the complete randomness. The car could behave normally for months, then suddenly turn homicidal without any provocation. Parents dropping kids at school would find their sedan trying to commit vehicular homicide. The car would surge forward with full power, often overwhelming the brakes and sending the vehicle crashing into buildings, people, or other cars. Families lived in constant fear of their own vehicles, never knowing when their trusted transportation might try to kill them. Volkswagen eventually added safety locks to all 5000s in the marketplace, but only after nearly a decade of carnage had made the name synonymous with automotive terrorism. The psychological scars lasted long after the mechanical fixes. Number 7. The 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona. NASCAR built this thing to go 200 miles per hour in perfect circles, then somehow decided civilians should be allowed to drive it on public roads. The Charger Daytona wasn't just a fast car, it was a barely controllable aerospace experiment that tried to kill its driver through advanced aerodynamics. This ground-bound aircraft belonged nowhere near civilian hands. The massive 440 or 426 Hemi 5.8 engines provided devastating power, but the real danger came from the extreme aerodynamic package. That 23-inch nose cone and towering rear wing were designed for oval racing, not highway driving. And at normal speeds, they created unpredictable forces that would suddenly destabilize the car without warning. Crosswinds were the Daytona's executioner. The enormous rear wing acted like a sail, catching side winds and trying to rotate the entire car. Drivers reported that highway driving felt like wrestling with an angry kite that could kill you. Picture cruising down the interstate when a gust of wind suddenly sends your car darting sideways across multiple lanes with no steering input from you. The aerodynamic instability became worse at speed. At 100+ miles per hour, minor steering inputs would create violent oscillations that could literally tear the wheel from your hands. Several Daytonas were crashed by their original owners within days of purchase. Dodge dealers actually warned buyers about the car's unique ability to kill them through advanced physics. but few listened until it was too late. Number 6. The 1992 to 2002 Dodge Viper RT/10. When Dodge decided to stuff a truck engine into a sports car chassis, they created something that was actively hostile to its driver from the moment you turned the key. The original Viper was less a car than a barely controlled explosion wrapped in aluminum bodywork. 400 horsepower of pure American fury that wanted nothing more than to kill you as spectacularly as possible. The massive 8.0-liter V10 produced 400 horsepower with zero electronic aids. No traction control, no stability control, no ABS, just raw, unfiltered violence that would instantly overwhelm the rear tires and send you sideways faster than human reflexes could respond. The throttle was essentially an on-off switch that treated the rear tires like smoke machines. But here's what made it truly demonic. The Viper's long hood and short wheelbase created inherently unstable dynamics that would snap into oversteer so fast that even professional drivers couldn't catch it. Test drivers called it the most dangerous car they'd ever experienced, and they weren't exaggerating. The side-mounted exhaust pipes could literally burn you if you weren't careful getting out, adding injury to insult. Emergency rooms across America saw a steady stream of Viper owners who discovered that 8.0 liters of displacement and overconfidence make a deadly combination. The Viper didn't just bite, it devoured everything in its path, including its own drivers. Number 5. The 1973 to 1989 Porsche 911 Turbo. They called it the Widowmaker for a reason. This car didn't just kill drivers, it specialized in killing experienced drivers who thought they could handle it. Professional racers called it the most dangerous production car ever built, and coming from people who raced for a living, that should have been enough warning. But the 930 Turbo's seductive performance kept claiming victims. The 3.0-liter turbocharged flat six produced 260 horsepower in early models, climbing to 330 in later versions. But power wasn't the killer. It was the delivery. The massive turbo would create seconds of lag, lulling you into false confidence, then suddenly unleash all its fury at once. Combined with the 911's already tail-happy characteristics, this created handling that was actively malevolent. Picture taking a corner feeling completely in control, then having the turbo spool up just as the rear engine unloads the front wheels, while simultaneously overwhelming the rear tires. The car would spin so violently that drivers often couldn't even see it coming. What made it truly evil was how it punished competence. Experienced drivers would push harder, thinking they could handle the challenge. The 930 would wait until the worst possible moment, mid-corner at high speed, then deliver its full fury. The result was often fatal and always spectacular. Insurance companies refused to cover them, and Porsche dealers required drivers to sign waivers acknowledging the car's deadly reputation. This wasn't just dangerous, it was diabolical. Number 4. The 1970 to 1977 Ford Pinto. The Ford Pinto had 0.85 fatalities for every 100,000 cars. But those numbers don't tell the real horror story. 27 people died in Pinto fires. But the true nightmare wasn't just the death toll. It was Ford's calculated decision to let people burn rather than fix an $11 part. This became automotive history's most infamous case of corporate murder. On August 10, 1978, 3 teenage girls died after their 1973 Ford Pinto was rear-ended by a van and burst into flames on an Indiana highway. But this wasn't an accident. It was predictable. Ford knew about the problem before the first Pinto rolled off the assembly line. Internal documents revealed they'd calculated that paying wrongful death lawsuits would be cheaper than the $11 per car fix. They literally put a price on human life and decided it wasn't worth saving. The Pinto's rear-mounted fuel tank would rupture in crashes as slow as 25 miles per hour. The filler neck would separate, gasoline would spray everywhere, and any spark would turn the car into an inferno. Victims weren't just killed, they were incinerated alive while rescuers watched helplessly outside. The Pinto proved that sometimes the most dangerous element in a car isn't the engine or the brakes. It's the moral bankruptcy of the people who built it. If this is shocking you, smash that subscribe button because the top 3 are absolutely insane. Cars so dangerous, they should be illegal. Number 3. The 2015 to 2017 Dodge Challenger SRT Hellcat. When Dodge decided to stuff 707 horsepower into a 4,400-pound muscle car, they created something that defied both physics and common sense. The Hellcat wasn't just powerful, it was violently, unpredictably powerful in ways that turned every drive into a potential disaster. This car proved that modern engineering could create something even more dangerous than the muscle cars of the past. The supercharged 6.2-liter V8 produced 707 horsepower and 650 pound-feet of torque, enough to overwhelm the rear tires at virtually any speed and in any weather condition. Floor the throttle, and the Hellcat would instantly break traction, sending the car sideways with such violence that even stability control couldn't always catch it. Picture leaving a Cars and Coffee meet, showing off for the crowd, then finding yourself spinning backward into a crowd of spectators. The car's tremendous weight meant that once it started sliding, it carried enormous momentum that was nearly impossible to control. Insurance companies literally refused to cover some Hellcat owners, and emergency rooms across America saw a steady stream of victims who discovered that 707 horsepower and overconfidence make a deadly combination. Social media became filled with videos of Hellcats crashing moments after leaving dealerships, earning it the nickname the Crowd Killer for good reason. Number 2. The 2005 to 2012 Porsche Carrera GT. When Paul Walker died in a Carrera GT crash in 2013, it wasn't just tragic, it was predictable. This $440,000 supercar was essentially a Le Mans race car that Porsche somehow convinced themselves to sell to rich civilians. The Carrera GT wasn't just dangerous, it was a predator in automotive clothing that had been claiming lives long before it took Hollywood's biggest action star. The 5.7-liter V10 engine produced 612 horsepower with 0 electronic safety nets, no traction control, no stability control, no ABS, just raw, unfiltered violence waiting to be unleashed. Picture having 612 horses under your right foot, with absolutely nothing between you and physics except skill and luck. The ceramic clutch would grab like a switch, the throttle response was instant and violent. And once the rear end started sliding, the laws of physics took over completely. Test drivers called it the most dangerous car they'd ever experienced. And these were professionals who drove race cars for a living. The car's carbon fiber monocoque chassis was unforgiving. There was no give, no second chances, no mercy for mistakes. According to investigations, the Carrera GT that killed Walker had 9-year-old tires, but even with fresh rubber, this car was lethal. Insurance companies charged premiums that rivaled small houses because they knew the truth. This wasn't transportation. It was a $440,000 suicide machine that demanded absolute perfection from its driver, or it would kill you without hesitation. Number 1. The 2020 to present Corvette C8 Z06. GM promised the C8 Z06 would be America's answer to European supercars. What they delivered was something far more dangerous. A mid-engine missile that could embarrass million-dollar exotics while actively trying to kill its driver through superior engineering. The Chevrolet Corvette has fatal accident rates nearly 5 times higher than the average vehicle, and the Z06 represents the pinnacle of this deadly lineage. The naturally aspirated 5.5-liter flat-plane crank V8 produces 670 horsepower and revs to an insane 8,600 RPM. But what makes the Z06 truly terrifying is how that power is delivered through a mid-engine chassis that most. The car will rotate around its center point with vicious speed, and once it starts sliding, the physics of the mid-engine layout mean it will snap around faster than human reflexes can respond. Picture this. You're accelerating out of a corner, feeling completely in control, when suddenly the car rotates 180 degrees and you're facing traffic at 100+ miles per hour. The Z06's sophisticated electronics create a false sense of security. Drivers push harder and harder, thinking technology will save them, until they reach that moment when physics overcomes electronics. At that point, the Z06 transforms from a controllable sports car into an unguided missile. This isn't just the most dangerous car ever built. It's proof that American engineering has finally created something that can kill you more efficiently than anything from Europe. These weren't just cars, they were lessons in automotive humility, reminding us that sometimes the pursuit of speed and power creates monsters that turn against their creators. From corporate evil in the Pinto to engineering perfection in the Z06, each of these machines proved that in the wrong hands, four wheels and an engine can become instruments of destruction. The next time you see a supercar on the road, remember, some machines are beautiful, but beauty can be the most dangerous trap of all. Which of these automotive nightmares scared you the most? Let me know in the comments, and remember, respect the machine, or it might not respect you back.